So welcome everybody to this meeting about labour unions and voting reform. I'm going to say just a few opening words and then hand over to our speakers. Why should trade unions support voting reform? I'm a little bit contrary, so I'm going to start off with all the reasons why they probably haven't or won't or don't. I don't think there's any other socialist party in the whole of Western Europe that has the same relationship with the trade unions as the Labour Party does. We will, if you get any group of trade unions together and start talking about the Labour Party, at some point somebody will say, well, we set the Labour Party up, it's our party. And we have a very proprietorial relationship with the party, almost like we gave birth to this party famously by a motion from Doncaster rail workers to set up a political party. I think as trade unions, we're not actually that keen on change. And we are incredibly tribal as organisations. So we're incredibly passionate about the Labour Party, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. We don't forgive easily. So many of us still have very strong opinions about the Lib Dems and their role in the coalition government and austerity. However, we are really pragmatic organisations as well, and our members always come first. So across the Southwest, if there were those of us who wouldn't talk to Tories, we would not be able to represent any of our local authority members and not be able to do any political lobbying whatsoever. We've had to get used to working with all different kinds of shades of local authority politicians and trying to find a way through for our members. And as we've seen throughout the pandemic, trade unions will go direct to government, work with government if that's what's going to deliver for our members. So we have that lovely pragmatic side as well. And I think we all know as well that if we get to Labour Party conference, delivering support for PR or any kind of voting reform will depend on the trade unions. So let's hear from two of the trade unions represented today. We've got Patt Osborne from Unite, and then afterwards we'll be hearing from Matt Roberts from the GMB. So over to you, Pat.
Yes, so just to introduce myself, my name is Patt Osborne. I'm the branch secretary of the Bournemouth District branch of Unite. So I'm not here necessarily officially representing Unite, but I am somebody that's a member of a branch that's got a policy motion for PR going to our policy conference very soon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I was born and brought up in North Dorset, and I've lived in North Dorset most of my life. And I've always voted Labour, and my parents have always voted Labour. My mum and dad always voted Labour, and my granddad always voted Labour. But we've always returned Tories. So it doesn't matter what we vote for, we always seem to return Tories. We've never been represented in North Dorset. In 2015, I became a councillor, town councillor. I was co-opted in at that stage, but since been elected in, but co-opted in at that stage, which meant that I went into a vacant ward, which means that even though I'm a town councillor, I'm still represented by Tory councillors because my ward's 2 streets away from my house. So I've never been represented by the Labour Party, and it's the Labour Party that I believe represent my values best of all. Since then, I've run for county council, ran for unitary council, ran for district council, been a parliamentary candidate a couple of times, and still the same frustrating result of even you can do everything you can, but there's still no representation. I still don't feel that I'm being represented in any meaningful way, and I know there are thousands of people in North Dorset and across Dorset that feel exactly the same. And they just don't really, their views are just paid lip service to by the Tories that are in charge. A couple of years ago, we invited Joseph Soucek along to one of our meetings, one of our CLP meetings, and we voted for a motion that, well, I think it was the 2019 conference, a motion for PR for the 2019 conference. subsequent to that, I got a call from the people, one of Joseph's colleagues, and she said, we're setting up a call for proportional representation and for trade unionists that are interested in proportional representation. Would you like to get involved? So I said, yeah, of course I'll get involved. Yeah, I'll come along and have a listen for an hour. I thought that'd be it. An hour of my time. Yeah, of course I can give you an hour of my time for that. So I went along. Not too many people there, unfortunately, at this stage. And the killer question: are you willing to propose a motion for go to one of your branch meetings and propose a motion for proportional representation? And I thought, well, I'm in an hour. It's been an hour, so I can give another hour and put a motion forward. That's not a problem at all. I'll do that. So I called up the regional officer at the time, and I said, Steve, because I knew Steve. Steve, when's the next branch meeting? And he goes, well, we haven't really got branch meetings at the moment because we haven't got elected officers. We need to restart the branch back up. Would you be interested? So I said, yeah, I will. Yes, I would be interested in that. I want to get through this motion on proportional representation, but I'm willing to commit some time and energy into getting the branch set up, because I think that's important as well. So that's what we did, and within a couple of meetings, we started to get some members along to the branch meeting. And we put the motion forward. It went through unanimously. It was like pushing on an open door, effectively. Everybody in agreement that proportional representation was something that was democratically necessary for them, particularly right across Dorset, right across the Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole area, as well as the Dorset, the more rural Dorset County areas. It's Tory, and you can see that in the BCP area, and within the BCP area, I think it's something like this. They've got Tories got 50% majority, really narrow majority. Having there was a coalition in place until not that long ago with 3 Labour councillors there, but that got a vote of no confidence when a couple of the coalition sadly passed away. The Tories pushed through a vote of no confidence. So with 50% of the council and only 30% of the vote, and that just seems a massive injustice when that more progressive coalition seemed to represent the views and a more pluralistic range of views of people in that area. So we're very proud to be having our motion debated at conference. I think John, who's agreed to be our delegates here today, so I'm pleased to see John here today. So that's my story, really. That's what I've got to say.
Thanks, Pat. So I'm going to go to Matt, and then we'll throw it open for questions, comments, discussion. Matt. And Matt, what I'm going to do is spotlight you. So that will change the way I think I was able to do that as host. Sorry, I couldn't do it for you, Pat. I don't want to do it halfway through you speaking, because I thought that would be a bit alarming.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, Joanne. I like your background, by the way. That's very good. So good evening, everyone. So my name is Matt Roberts. I'm from the GMB Union. I'm the political officer for the Southwest, and it's a pleasure to be invited along tonight. So again, thanks very much for the invite. So what I thought I would do is just talk about what is the GMB's position on proportional representation, and just sort of go through some of the background of that and what some of the recent developments are on that, and I'll try and bring in a sort of a local link to it as well, and then be really interested in the debate. I think it's an important debate, and sort of take part in that sort of debate and any questions. So in terms of the GMB's position, really similar to many unions, we've long had a position that to basically remain with the first past the post system, and some of the reasons why that has really been our position is one of the, and obviously there's many, I'm sure those of you you're on the call here, on the meeting here, you're very probably familiar with what is the arguments that are used sort of for and against, but the particular one sort of for the GMB point of view that's been put forward in our Congress as to why we've kind of previously sort of maintain the position with the first past the post. One of the main ones was the argument around the accountability of the MPs, and kind of if an MP is kind of failing in their job effectively, if you want to say it like that in those terms, then they can be removed. Whereas at least theoretically, I know in practice, maybe that's not so much the case, but because of some of the massive majorities that some of our Tory MPs have in this region. But certainly if there's a list system, there's obviously that issue around how can the voters kind of directly remove those people. So that's been one of the reasons. Also, a kind of a bit of an opposition towards a hybrid system, whereas you have the two tiers, whereas some MPs have that direct set of constituents, but some MPs don't. I think it's been the issue as well around what is the type of proportional representation that we have, and I think certainly the alternative vote system that we had that referendum on, I think it was it in the sort of early days of the coalition, wasn't it? I think it's around 2011, was it, that we had that? And I think certainly for that particular system was sort of seen as quite unpopular, and obviously it was a fairly strong vote. I think it was around 70%, which that was defeated in the nationwide referendum. Another reason that's been cited within our union is in relation to kind of the broken promises. So I think Joanne touched on this at the beginning, particularly with the Liberal Democrats, and kind of difficult to kind of hold politicians to manifesto promises, potentially on which they fight an election. Is where you have these sort of coalition deals being done, then it can maybe at least theoretically take away some of that accountability. So the last time that there was a motion passed at our conference on this, so in the GMB we call our annual conference our Congress. So that was at the Congress in 2010, which was in Plymouth, and it was a motion that was actually very much in support of first past the post, and that is our current position. That remains to this day. However, there is a move toward within some of our branches that they are starting to look at the alternatives in terms of possibly proportional representation, and particularly in this area, one of our branches, the Torbay and South Devon branch, has been very keen on putting forward proposals to change our union's position, and they've unanimously passed motions at the branch level in support, and when these have gone forward to the Congress, as yet they haven't. That's been unsuccessful. It's the motion has not been passed at the conference. So the 2010 position is the current position that we have. So in terms of the Torbay position, what their branch has very much been saying is that it was previously thought that first past the post was the most likely system to deliver a Labour government and to avoid coalitions. But what the branch is saying is that because politics is changing and the outcomes of elections have been less predictable than before, and there's been too many decades, quite frankly, has been lost to Tory rule at Westminster, when actually a majority of the country did not vote for that. So they're wanting to look again at what is in the best interests of trade unionists. What they've been looking to do is for us to affiliate to your organisation, for example, as one action, and also to bring in a genuinely proportional representation system across the UK, and not the alternative vote system or any variant of that. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. And in our Congress this year, the 2021 Congress, which is going to be a virtual Congress, There are motions from some of our branches that have been put forward again on this topic of proportional representation. So it'd be very interesting to see sort of how that goes. In terms of myself, because I'm a paid official of the union, as opposed to a lay member or activist, it's obviously very important that I follow the democratic instruction of our membership. So obviously it wouldn't be appropriate for me to kind of try and dictate any of my personal views and so on and so forth. I think, you know, our branches clearly through the process, through our Congress, can make a decision on that. So I think that's really where we are. We've kind of got the 2010 position, which is fairly, we're very clearly in favour of first past the post system. But I think, as I say, there's certainly, I'm aware of a number of our branches are kind of looking again at that and reevaluating that, because, you know, we have had many years of Tory rule, which has caused a lot of suffering to our members and our communities. And I think this is really a big reason why people are starting to reevaluate that. So I think, as I kind of said at the beginning, I think it's a really important debate to have. And obviously we're a democratic organisation in the GMB. When I've kind of researched information prior to coming on to this meeting tonight, it's been clear that there's sort of, you know, I can absolutely say there's no kind of forces within the GMB that's trying to sort of keep within that it must always be first past the post. It's very much, well, this is what our lay members voted as our position. That could change, you know, and if it does change, you know, it changes, and that will be our new position. So certainly, I think it'd be interesting to see how the motion goes at this year's Congress, and sort of going forward from there, really. So I think that's what I'd say, Joanne, by way of an introduction, and that's really what our position is at the moment.
Thanks, Matt. That was great, and it's interesting to hear the history of the GMB's position. Unison doesn't actually have any position. Of course, what that means that the status quo is in effect our position, because we haven't taken any other position. I'm going to throw it open to the floor, really, for discussion. I haven't seen any hands in the list. I'm trying to work out how to stop spotlighting Matt, but I can't still spotlight it on my screen. All right, there we are. That's better. So throw it open for discussion, and I've got David, and then I've got Paul. And people often say questions, and I'm going to get the panel to answer. I'll come back to the panel if I think the panel need to answer something. I think we need to hear from as many people here as possible. So I'm going to say David, and then I'll take you, Paul.
Hi everyone. I'm obviously, well, I'm a great proponent for proportional representation. I'm a member of Unison in the South East Health Branch. I work for the NHS, and I'm relatively new to the Labour Party as well. And I'm absolutely bemuddled and confused about how to progress things. Now, I am sorted out with the CLP now, because I passed a motion for that, so I'm on board with that. And I am a speaker, and I'm pretty fully involved. But I'm very keen to progress something through Unison, my union. I've spoken to the secretary and mailed, and it just seems very confusing, the whole sort of process. So it would be really helpful if you could point out, how do I go? So from an individual member, how do I go about proposing a motion to Unison?
That sounds like it's a question for me, really. It is a very complicated process, David, because we've made things even more difficult in Unison, in that our conference doesn't make political decisions. So that's made through the Labour link structure. So it would have to be the Labour link structure making that decision. So if you put your, if you're happy to, if you could put your email address in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
What I'll do is email you separately, because I just don't want to subject everybody else.
All right.
And if anybody else wants some advice on how our Labour link structure works, I mean, I always say to people, you have to kind of work backwards on these processes. You have to make sure that the I can't remember, we send 60 or so people to Labour Party conference. You have to make sure those people vote a certain way, and you have to work backwards from that, really. And how you do that is, and you have to be very clear as well, because any room for manoeuvre in policy is what, you know, the union officials love. No, I shouldn't say that. I don't mean that at all, obviously. Paul, and then I'll bring in John.
Sorry, I unmuted a bit early, so sorry if you heard my raucous laughter. A couple of things. First of all, Matt understandably says, well, we've got to hold our politicians and our leaders to account, and particularly when it comes to the manifesto. And it's quite interesting that, in fact, Labour, I think in 3 manifestos in the last 25 years, has actually had PR in the manifesto. And in fact, it was in the 97 manifesto. And because we got a decent majority, we didn't bother about it. So I think sometimes people put forward, they're looking for reasons why we shouldn't do things. And as I think Joanne said in her introduction, the trade union movement is small c conservative. We love our history, and quite right, I love our history. But to be honest, I'm more concerned about our future. And at the next election, if you look at the majority the Tories have got and the situation in Scotland, it's very difficult to envisage the sort of swing that's going to be necessary for Labour to win an outright majority. The only way, I think, and things can change obviously in the next couple of years, but it seems to me the only way we can get the Tories out and have a progressive government is if we're prepared to have, you know, say we're going to have electoral reform, we're going to have PR, promise it, but then actually do it. And for me, I'm prepared to argue, and I have for decades, about the finer points of policy and all the rest of it. But without power, as you said, Matthew, you know, without power, then, well, we're not lost, but we're going backwards. And that's what's happened in the last 11 years. And there's a danger that it would continue after the next election. So we've got to be prepared to work with others and to have a more pluralistic approach, as Pat said. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I've got John Merritt.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I was just going to say a couple of points. I've been a long-time supporter of PR, and I think that some of the key issues that I think have convinced me, and I think should convince most people, are that it is more democratic in principle. Having a majority as part of any argument about democracy talks about majorities. So proportionality is a means by which a majority can be achieved. So in principle, I think it should be supported by anyone who supports democracy. And generally unions do support democracy. There is more chance of electing a left of Tory government. So I wouldn't disagree in the slightest that Liberals might undermine particular coalitions, and in the 70s there was the Lib Lab Pact, and the role of the Scottish nationalists was kind of really important in terms of losing that Labour government the power. But across Europe, the left of centre parties have been elected significantly more than the Labour Party's been elected. So as a strategy for election, it's clearly failed. And to say that any of them have been particularly left-wing is problematic. Obviously, 1948 stands out as a particular result, but yeah, generally the Labour governments that have been elected haven't been particularly left-wing, I would say. And I do agree that the alternative vote system isn't a good system. The Fabians did some work on the different systems and found it was the most easy to rig. So by the use of directing people to vote in particular ways on second and third votes, enabled them to manipulate the outcome of the result of that in a way that they're not able to do through alternative vote systems. Yeah, and maybe just reiterate a bit what Paul said about the first past the post system. Is electorally, it seems really challenging to see the Labour Party being able to maintain or regain a majority through the first past the post system in the near future, with electoral commissions, boundary changes and so on. And it also means that it's a small number of seats that get the focus of attention. So 50 odd seats that are marginals are where all the parties pour in all their support, and that means masses of areas and the Southwest is, as an example, just don't get any National Labour Party support. It all goes off to marginal seats that they think they're going to win. So I think there's a lot of reasons to support it.
Thanks, John. I'm going to bring Rick in a minute, but I'm just going to throw out something for food for thought if you're thinking about contributing. You know, we talk about these issues in very factual, very dry ways, and my view has long been that people vote very emotionally. And I don't say that pejoratively at all, because I think emotion is a very powerful driving force. How do we get this to be an emotional issue for people, that they feel that strength of feeling about that tends to get people out to vote? But Rick, can we hear from you?
Thanks, Joanne. I sort of put my hand up because nobody else was much. But I'm a CLP secretary here in South Devon in Totnes. So I'm with Patt in that I'm a lot older than Patt, and I've yet to vote for the winning candidate in any election I voted in since about 1973. So it can be a lifetime sentence, really, first past the post. But I was interested in what Matt said about his members in Torbay and South Devon, and because we're in South Devon. And one of the things I think that CLPs have problems with is actually liaising very well with unions and with members who are in unions local to their CLPs. So it seems fairly evident from all the data that we have that most Labour Party members, or a good majority of Labour Party members, up to 70%, are in favour of some sort of electoral reform and proportional representation. But, you know, we need to talk more to with our comrades in unions about how, you know, how they feel about it, and work together to maybe try to bring it to conference, or to discuss it in more detail, I think. And it's quite difficult. So what I'm saying here is a plea, in a sense. How can we get CLPs and union branches to actually talk more to each other and work more closely together and to discuss some of these issues? I think that would be useful.
Thanks. Can I bring in Caroline next?
Hello, I'm a slight interloper. I'm not in the Southwest, I'm actually in the Southeast. But I'm kind of interested in the comments about lists and list MPs and keeping MPs accountable. I mean, in my CLP, we had Peter Viggers, and he spent all his expenses on a duck house and still got voted in again afterwards. So, you know, in safe seats, I don't think MPs are accountable at all. But I'm also kind of, you know, the list thing always I find quite difficult, because we're currently in a situation where we've got a by-election going on with a single candidate, well, not parachuted in, but a single candidate selected without any selection list. So I think sometimes, even without list systems, we seem to get lists. You know, we don't necessarily always get a say in who our MPs are. I mean, the whole idea of a list is going after certain voting systems that we wouldn't necessarily have to under PR anyway. But I just always find it quite an interesting argument.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm going to bring Pat and then Matt back in before going to David. Got quite a few women on the call. It's always nice to hear from women. Just a little opinion there. Pat, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on a couple of general points. That you know, as has been said, the unions founded the Labour Party, but they weren't the only organisation that founded the Labour Party. And in an actual fact, the Labour Party has always been a progressive alliance of forms. Okay, so we've been under this so-called Big Ten of the Labour Party, but we've always been a a form of progressive alliance within that. Sadly, often to our detriment, some competing factions within the Labour Party. Now, what we see in terms of what the public want in polls, what we consistently see is what the public want is a progressive alliance. So the Tories may be getting around 40% of the vote, but even before you start to take into account Plaid and the Scottish Nationalists, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, and the Green Party together do a massive majority over the Conservatives. Now, PR will actually be better for trade unions for a couple of reasons, as far as I can see. First of all, it could and would lead to a voice at government, because even if it was under a progressive alliance, there would be a voice at government. But secondly, that voice within the Labour Party would become even stronger for trade unions. It's already strong, but it would become even stronger for trade unions within the Labour Party as factions broke away and decided to form their own parties, and you get much more people organising around a slightly different shade of red rosette, and still being able to get their voice heard. So for me and for the trade unions, PR is really a no-brainer.
Thanks. Matt, you wanted to come back on some issues.
Yeah, I mean, just first of all, I think on a personal note, I definitely feel the pain that others are sort of expressing around, never being in a position where you voted for the MP that you've got. I mean, I've spent a lot of time myself living in areas with very safe Tory majorities, and at some stage in the distant past, I've tried to do things like vote tactically, because at the time the Lib Dems maybe had a slight chance of possibly coming a little bit closer than other parties, and tried to vote tactically. But that's the only time in my life that I've sort of not voted for Labour. But it's again, it just feels very much like a wasted vote. So yeah, definitely feel the pain of others. I'm in quite a rare position now, where I do live in one of the very few rare Labour seats in the southwest. So but yeah, definitely can relate to what others have said. I wanted to just say firstly about the links between the trade union branches and the CLPs. Just from a GMB point of view, in my role being the political officer in the Southwest, we do like a regional affiliation to all of the Labour Party CLPs, and also to local trades councils as well. And I would always sort of encourage our branches to affiliate as well. Certainly, if anyone wanted to get in touch with me, I'll put my contact details on the chat, and it'll be the same, for the other unions as well. So I guess the answer is to how do we get those links is I guess it starts off quite simple, is just making contact with each other, and make contact with the political officers in the unions. If you can't find the contact details for that person, just go through the regional offices. And certainly I would always encourage our branches to get involved and with our affiliation with the Labour Party. So I think to the colleague who's talking on that point, I think there's definitely more we can do to build those links, and I totally agree on that. Other thing I wanted to say is maybe just to chuck a bit of controversy into the debate is I think there's going to be quite a lot of publicity coming soon around PR, in terms of we've got the Scottish parliamentary elections coming up at the same time as our local elections, haven't we, in next month? And there's been quite a lot of stuff in the press already regarding the Alba Party situation, and I think that's going to bring more publicity around the issue. And I was interested in what thoughts people have on that, because clearly in a first past the post system, that kind of new party probably wouldn't have any chance of getting anywhere at all. But and it seems like it's largely sort of issues between two quite powerful individuals within the Scottish politics that's going on there, and it's kind of being played out very publicly. And if the Alba Party are successful in getting quite a lot of seats, as what's been speculated, you could have a situation there that could have quite wide ramifications in sort of both Scotland and the wider United Kingdom. So I think that's, certainly this issue is, in my opinion, is probably going to get a lot of publicity around those elections, and that would maybe add a different dynamic to the discussion.
Thanks, Matt. David, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, several points. One thing about Scotland, I think that's a diversion. If anything, we should be concentrating on English devolution. We're the only country in the UK that don't have any form of PR. So we shouldn't be moaning about Scotland. We should be, and that's a diversion. And then the right-wing press will actually try and crucify PR because of that. I quite agree, Joanne, it's about attention for PR. Somehow we've got to raise it because it's boring to the person in the street. But it's also adding that emotion. And I think it's when we're proposing PR, it really is transformational. It's a major piece of reform, like women's suffrage. And I don't think we realise that. And that's where the emotion comes through, because it's about it's not about what's wrong with the Conservatives. It's about what a progressive alliance can do. And we've got such challenges, and especially when it's union related. When you think of the guys in Deliveroo and Uber, I mean, they've actually done it off their own back, it seems to me, almost going to court. And so where really, we got such a threat from these big global companies and zero hours and all this sort of free market we've had over the last 30 years. It's a great opportunity for unions to re-establish themselves and really kind of rebrand themselves, I think, for the coming years, because we've got technology just on the doorstep. We're going to have huge problems about employment, climate change, and all these are a shared purpose across virtually, and there's lots of common ground amongst Libs, Greens, Independents, Labour. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity, and I think it's really, I get emotional about it because it's, I mean, to be honest, we can criticise the Tories as much as we like, but it's very negative, and I think there's so much more positive about a new electoral system, and it is transformational. I think it will be, and it won't work overnight. Because it would, like in New Zealand, it took quite a few years for the sort of electorate to get used to the system, and a couple of elections. Labour didn't even get in the first time they under PR in New Zealand. I think they got in under the following election. So it's not a silver bullet, but it really needs to be done. And I quite agree. I think the communication of it will be important as we progress and get more support for it in terms of of making it the understanding of the layperson and making it emotional. And it can be emotional not only for trade unions, for socialists, for Labour, for Lib Dems as well. I don't know why they're not jumping up and down, putting their hair out. God, I mean, all they do is sort of half-heartedly mention it. They're never in power. Well, when they were, they messed it up anyway. But anyway, and the Greens must be jumping at the bit as well. So there's such an opportunity. We're in the majority, and yet we're saying so it's getting our ducks in a row. So I'm really enthusiastic, I mean, as you can tell, but I am emotional about it because I think it's absolutely fundamental to the future of this country.
Yes, thanks, David. I really like the point about women's suffrage as well. And on that, I'm going to bring in Jennifer next.
Hello, yes, I'm also an interloper, retired, so no longer a union member. But I wanted to endorse what David has just said. I also think that first past the post, the Professor Curtis Make Votes Matter was wonderful. If you get a chance to listen to what he said, it's great and very informative. But what he said was you have to look at also what first past the post does. And I think it's quite indicative that the Tories want to bring back first past the post for the London mayoral elections. Why would they want to do that unless it actually helps them rather than anybody else? I also think that first past the post breeds complacency. I, for the first time in my life, now live in a Labour marginal constituency and local council in Plymouth, and it's absolutely wonderful. And I see the amount of time and effort that goes into canvassing people, to finding out what local people want, and to trying to make Plymouth such a great place. I wonder whether in safe seats of any party, whether you actually get that. And I sometimes wonder whether the red wall has gone Tory because it was neglected by New Labour, because they didn't think they had anywhere else to go. And if you look at what Thatcher did to them, is it any surprise that they've now decided to try something else? So I don't think if you've got a proportional system, anyone can afford to be complacent. They have to actually be responsive all the time. And the last thing I would say is I'm absolutely horrified about the gig economy and how people who are in fact self-employed are now treated in a dreadful way and don't have to prove that they were self-employed like we did when we were self-employed. And it seems to me that if you have a progressive alliance, it's probably the only way of getting through in safe Tory seats like East Devon, where I used to live before. But secondly, it also means that people realise what they've lost. I know because I'm ancient and I remember what it was like when there was still a post-war consensus. I remember what it was like pre-Thatcher, but young people don't. And what really worries me is that unless we make their lives better, they're all going to switch off, and they need trade unions and they need a different voting system. Right, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was great. Keith, I've got you next, and then I'm coming to Austin.
It's okay. Yes, I'm Keith Edwards from East Devon. I was out campaigning the other day, and someone said to me that, well, as a Labour candidate, my vote will be wasted if I vote for you, because Tories always get it in East Devon, and that is the pattern. And we got talking about, well, perhaps the voting system also needs to change. And she said, yes, but people are so familiar with first past the post, and what are the alternatives? And this is an issue that I feel it's difficult to really take a line on this, because it does beg the question, what should we begin to promote in terms of when we talk about proportional representation? The inevitable question is, well, what kind of system are we advocating, and should we be familiar with that now and beginning to promote it? Although I know there's all sorts of differences of opinion on PR, but I do wonder whether we're going to bring the public on board for a change in the electoral system. Somehow we've got to be a bit more confident about what system, what is the alternative that we really are promoting.
Thanks, Keith. Over to you, Austin.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed that Matthew brought up about Scotland and the whole Alba Party situation. I'm aware the debate's been going on in the chat, but as with most things, I'd just like to say they've solved it in Germany. They've got a system of it's called overhang and equalisation seats for their Bundestag, which sorts out the vote so that it remains proportional. So the way it works out is that they're supposed to have 598 members, but in the current parliament they've got 709 due to sorting out the proportional system. So while for systems, I know maybe we shouldn't get into the debate because you can go off and I'm sure everyone in here would disagree to some extent with what everyone else's opinions are on it, even though we're all united around proportional representation as an idea. You do have solutions for everything, and so for AMS, their solution could be what they've done in Germany. Thank you.
Thanks. I can't see any more hands. Oh, David, are you coming back? Oh, I'll take Paul first because
that's right.
I'll take Paul first. It'll be your third third go, David, so I'll take Paul first, then you.
Thanks.
Unless anyone else comes back who hasn't spoken.
Sorry, I'm waving my hand, but I can't. For some reason, I can't find the thing to show my hand electronically. So apologies for that. I mean, I think you know what we're talking about. I mean, it is quite complex in a way, but it's about fairness. And I mean, if I was a Green member of the Green Party, and got millions of votes and had one MP, I'd be furious. And I know a colleague made the point about the Lib Dems getting, you know, millions and millions of votes and having 10 or 11 MPs. And I think if you're in a safe seat, I mean, as I am, North Somerset, Liam Fox, we have the honour of having Dr. Liam Fox as our MP, well-known progressive. And I mean, lots of people say, well, it's pointless going out. And if we had PR, a progressive alliance, the compass sort of platform, a progressive alliance, where we work closely together and say, well, let's actually more formally support whoever's got the best chance of beating the Tories. I mean, I'm up for that. Difficult, I know, but I'd be up for that. But PR, it introduces an element of fairness, which is just missing at the moment. And if there's a PR system for the Scottish parliamentary elections, for the Senedd in Wales, for the Greater London elections. We even had a PR in the Labour National Executive Committee elections. You know, that's so. It's not that PR is a strange system that no one knows anything about. It's just we don't know as much about it in England. And of course, we had a form of PR when we had the European elections. And I think we've just got to get over this being reserved about change and just say it will be a more democratic and a fairer system. I just think we've got to go for it, or just we're going to go out campaigning and try to get Labour elected, but in reality we'll have another Tory government. If we want to stop that, we've got to change. We can't keep hitting our head against the wall and expect a different result. It won't happen.
Before I go back to you, are you waving your hand, Mary?
I am.
Yes, right. Well, I'll come to you before going to David, yes.
Okay. What I wanted to just tick a few things off. First of all, in Scotland, it might be that salmon in a sideshow. This super majority is not really what they're looking for. Is for Boris to give them permission to have a referendum, and they don't want him to be in that position. But the people who are likely to get in for the Labour Party are on the list, the regional list. Because they've got a proportional system, we exist in Scotland because under first past the post, we only have one MP. So that's something to say to people when they think that proportional systems don't help Labour. They help Labour where Labour is not doing very well. And they obviously help the Tories where they're not doing very well, but they don't look at that in the same way. I just want to say a word about lists. I don't think we're offering to have a system. We haven't got into a systems debate, like Austin said, but we do have a list of one in all our constituencies. We don't have a choice of who we vote for. Even in North Dorset, I would have voted for Patt, but I don't have a choice to. So I think the list of one is an argument in favour of first past the post as well as against lists. And I think that what's happened tonight is we've aired a lot of the discussion that we should be having everywhere, in branches, in trade union branches and constituencies. And fortunately for us, that we do so badly in the Southwest, so we only have 6 MPs, that practically all our constituencies are in favour. We've had 39 motions from our constituencies, and we have 16 constituencies which are suspended, or they're not allowed to have meetings until they've had a result from the regional office, or there are reasons why we haven't got the 100%, but I think we'll go for 100% by the summer. But when I went to a meeting yesterday in the Northeast, it's exactly reversed, because they haven't suffered so much from first past the post, like many of our members on this Zoom are saying that they never voted successfully for Labour. I didn't. I did the reverse. I only lived in 6 constituencies and they were all Labour. And then I came to Bristol West and we were 3rd. And I stood as a candidate where we didn't get any help. And everybody said vote tactically against Labour. And there was a lot of resistance. But William Waldegrave, who was the MP at that time, came up to me at the count and said, thank you for letting me win the seat. There's something wrong about a system where if you put up the Labour vote, you put in the Tory. And that's what I did. And that's what I don't want to happen at the next election. And I do think the actual offer from Labour to say we will be the party, the party in government, Labour-led government, who will implement legislation on electoral reform is a good offer to a lot of people who've never had a chance to be enfranchised, to have a say in politics and haven't therefore been denied a voice. So I don't want to monopolize it, but there's lots of things that we're discussing which are worthwhile other people sharing in. So if you know people who haven't been on the Zoom, ask for us and we will give you a copy of it and you can watch it.
Thanks for that, Mary. Is William Waldegrave still alive? I really hope he is, because then he would have seen Fangham win such a thumping majority in Bristol West. Which it is a straight, Bristol West is a seat where 20% of the electorate change every year. So yes, you can completely change the entire electorate over the period of a parliament. David, do you want to come back and say anything else? But and then I'll bring in
I'll be very brief. I'm sorry, I can't remember the gentleman's name. In terms of when we talk about systems, don't. I mean, it's basically PR is about if you get 20% of the votes, you get 20% of the seats. That's it. Keep it simple. And then the way the system, hopefully, the sort of timeline will be that if it becomes in the Labour manifesto, then there's a general alliance, which is Labour isn't part of, the general systems agreement, which Labour for electoral reform, plus Libs, Dems, other parties, they're all part of. And then hopefully through a deliberative system, like a citizens' assembly, a system will be, the people will be asked about coming up with a choice of system to be implemented. And that way, because otherwise, again, the right-wing press will they'll try and muddy the waters about systems, oh, it's too complicated, this, that, and the other. So just keep it simple. The system will be sorted out by something like a citizens' assembly. And you don't have to get involved. And it's just fair, as I think was it Paul said. It's just most people realise it's a fair system. I'll shut up.
Thanks, David. Phil.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up this thing that a few people have said about if we get it in the Labour manifesto that we'll promise to get PR and hopefully people will tactically vote Labour to give us a majority. I just wonder, like after we did that in 1997 and didn't deliver on it, why should anyone believe us? So don't we need to go further and actually make an agreement with other parties where they will they'll win some seats themselves and then have power in Parliament to force the issue? Why would they trust Labour to deliver when we didn't 20 years ago? Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. I got Austin, and you'd like to come back in. I don't know if that's a hand that, oh, right, it's a hand that should have gone down. Right, I'm going to go back to Matt and then Pat. For kind of final thoughts, things that you might have learned or think differently about after tonight's meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. Yeah, I think I've learned quite a lot actually, to be honest. And I think David Westwood, I think you made a very good point there, because I think for me, one of the main obstacles to what you're trying to achieve with this group, with this campaign, is the kind of the argument around, well, we know what the existing system is. The existing system is quite clear, it's simple, it's well known, but you know, what the alternative, there could be lots of different versions of that. So I think you're probably spot on there, David, that it needs to be just the point around, 20% of the vote, 20% of the seat, and keep it simple, and then kind of work out the rest through, whether we call it, a citizens' assembly or whatever name we want to call it. So, yeah, I think I've got a lot of agreement with that, really. I mean, just from a GMB point of view, I'll be interested to see how our branches kind of take forward the debate. And, that's not something that I'll be directly involved with. That's obviously a democratic process within those branches. And it'll be interesting to see how the argument evolves going forward. And I'm sure if any of our branches, would like to perhaps speak with anyone from this group, that's maybe something we could look at arranging. And then, we'll obviously make their own decisions then on whether we keep the existing position that we have in our union, or whether we maybe change the position. And that will be determined from there. So just to say thanks again for this really, really interesting discussion. So yeah, thanks very much all.
Pat?
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's really been enlightening. I just want to pick up on something that Phil mentioned around how do we build trust, just as a closing thought, and maybe something to take away, and something for me to take away and ponder a bit further. I think absolutely right what people have said around the devolved governments in Scotland and Wales, and in places like North Dorset, and I know I bang on about North Dorset, but it's because I know North Dorset. In places like North Dorset, we're amongst the most underrepresented people in the United Kingdom. We don't have a devolved parliament. We don't have a metro mayor. We're hugely underrepresented compared to other parts of the UK. So that's something that needs to be fixed within proportional representation. But how do we win trust on that? Well, I think we're already winning trust on it, Phil, and you can see that up and down the country at a local authority level with rainbow coalitions, for want of a better phrase, or coalitions, progressive coalitions forming together, sometimes with independents as well, and local interest parties. But we can see that happening. We can see Labour councillors, Labour politicians working with other politicians, and really showing that's the right way forward for their local communities. And I think if we can start to shine a light on that, and on those good news stories, and amplify it, then that's something that will start to ring a bell with the electorate at a national level as well.
Thanks for that. I think it's been a really good discussion. I can't say I can't overemphasize how much I agree with David's point about keeping this simple. I've seen the discussion about the different list systems, the different ways of working that, and instantly my mind just blocks that kind of stuff out. I think this might be a campaign where you have to build alliances with Tories in the northeast, who are as fed up as socialists are in the southwest. And I do think that, as well as working with the parties, you might have to extend the range of that, because there might be people now in Bristol West who think, what's the point of voting for any of the party? And I think, as I said, you've got to win that emotional argument first, and contend with, it's not just trade unions who love our history. We know that particularly the English, we love our history and our flag waving and the Queen and all the nonsense around Parliament. So winning support for change is difficult. But I think focusing on the emotional and a better future for people, hopefully will win out. So thank you everybody for your contributions.